Welcome everybody to the Austin DFW San Antonio October Tug event. So we got a great event planned for you today. It's really great to see all these familiar faces out there, some new ones as well. We have about 200 people that registered today. So good turnout, and we got folks from all over the country as well as all over the world. Our speakers from the UK too. So looking forward to having this event with you guys. So before I start, as always, I want to just give a big special thank you to the members of our advisory council. These are the folks that put a lot of time in behind the scenes to make sure that this event happens each and every month. They line up the speakers, they help with the coordination. So really just round of applause to these folks that have helped us out. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to kick off with a couple of housekeeping announcements. And then we have our feature presentation with Carl Allchin, who's going to tell us about why we aren't communicating with our data. So how can we more effectively communicate with our data, and what are some challenges that organizations face with that? And then at the end, we're going to do a network breakout session. So for those of you guys that are maybe first time, this is a great way to do some networking. We'll break the Zoom into 2 sessions. You can pick a room and then meet other folks in the community and share some ideas. So please stay after the presentation and participate in that event. So first, I'd like to do just a friendly reminder and sort of level set the meeting format that we have here. This is a live meeting, so we do encourage you guys to turn on your cameras. We'd love to see everybody and just sort of get to know each other. But since it is a live meeting, please observe your customary Zoom etiquette, right? So mute if you're not speaking. We would like everyone to be participating in our Q&A with our speakers. So we're going to go ahead and open up the chat. If you have any questions or links or comments or anything like that, please put it in the chat. If you have specific questions for our presenter, please do a private chat to our co-host, Homer Hegedus, and then he will go ahead and field those questions at the end of the presentation. So we'll be holding all the Q&A till after. And then at the end of our presentation, I'll send out a link. I'll put it in the chat, and also after the event, we'd love to get your feedback. If there's any ideas you guys have as far as how we can better improve our events, we'd love to hear from you guys. So just some general announcements. We wanted to highlight a couple of events coming down the pipe. The biggest one, TC, is right around the corner. It's coming up in less than a month. So again, it'll be virtual. So you guys save your mark it on your calendar, November 9th through 11th, from 9 to 3 Pacific. Every day they're going to be broadcasting the TC, and it was a great event last year, and they got even bigger plans this year as well. Definitely, if there's one thing you want to catch, check the Iron Viz Championship. Make sure you check that. If you've never seen that before, it has some of the best dashboarding you've ever seen, and it's all live and it's super cool. So definitely check that out. In regards to our other upcoming events, we have some tugs planned for the next 3 months. Again, they're going to be virtual. We have our November 18th, December 9th, and January 13th coming down the pipe. So mark those on your calendar as well. We'll send out a reminder. So with that, I wanted to introduce our featured speaker, Carl Allchin, who is, he's been practicing the craft of Tableau for about 10 years. He's currently with the Information Lab out of London. So he's graciously taken the time in his late evening to meet with us. And Carl's the other head coach at the data school. He's been a social ambassador for the past 5 years, and also a Zen Master for the last 2. But what's really cool is Carl's published 2 books, one around Tableau prep, and another one that's coming out here at the end of October called Communicating with Data. So we're all getting a good preview of his book. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to you, Carl.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's it's kind of a brave move by me, to be British, presenting to an American audience. Hopefully my accent will be all right. Another reason why I'm being a little bit brave is talking to a Tableau audience about why we're not communicating with data enough. And what I mean by that is not you individually. I think what we've got to think about collectively is our organizations and how that puts together. And as Chris mentioned, in the process of writing my new book, this theme became stronger and stronger and stronger. And that was really weird how that bubbled up when actually I sat down to write a book on how effectively we communicate with data. As Chris mentioned, I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and I take it almost as a personal slight that I haven't fixed the world yet. We're still struggling to do some of the things that it's actually really basic. You're at a Tableau user group, you probably really enjoy using the tool, or you have a strong interest in it. So you probably think it's quite good at doing the thing that it's designed for, which is communicating data. So why are we all still struggling so much? Like, your breakout rooms at the end of this session is amazing. I love to see that within the user group, especially when we can't get together in person so much more. But why are we still having to work out best practice, working our way around that? So what I wanted to do was just kind of take some time to think today about that challenge. And as I was going through writing the book, like I say, that challenge grew and became more pertinent to what I was actually writing, and ended up taking quite a lot of editing work to get through that. But I wanted to kind of sit and just think about that challenge and just kind of share that with you, and kind of what I found from it, and actually hear your feedback on it. Because writing a book is possibly the loneliest thing to do. Writing a book during lockdown is even lonelier than that. And on top of that, I've just had my first child 5 weeks ago. So writing a book in lockdown while having your partner pregnant and sleeping for quite a lot of the time is even lonelier than that. So I really haven't shared these ideas with many people. So really interested to see what all of your thoughts are from that. And that challenge is just trying to think about why it's so hard to communicate with data. I'll come back to that. I will say why listen to me, and why I kind of came up with that. There are a lot of people who have written about the subject. I just kind of wanted to share why I think I'm kind of in a space to talk about it in a slightly different way to what other people have done. But think through also, let's go and take a step back and think about the communication process. I'm sure the words pre-attentive attributes, they're all on the tip of our tongue. If anyone's ever been to the Tableau conference, you'll see that in multiple slides. But that's not it for me. We've got to take a few steps back from that before we even get to that point. And the same with data. That data, we often kind of talk about it, that everybody knows it and uses it and loves it. And that's because we're using the tool, we probably do. But actually not everybody is there. And then even when we get these things right, when we know how to communicate and we know how to use data effectively too, why do we come across so many challenges within our organization? And so I've got some talking points around that. So there is this challenge that's really just, I couldn't write it in bigger font if I tried, but it's why is it so hard to communicate with data? Again, this tool is so effective and to be used. When I started my career 15 years ago, I found data because I was a history and politics student, so I didn't really come across data to that point. I might have some economics tables to reference, but that was as far as I got. So when I started to see data being used in organizations, it really confounded me and just dumbfounded me as to why was it so hard to communicate effectively. And lots of that was about the tool. When I found Tableau, that changed. But 10 years down the line, it's not changed for everybody. And this is where this number comes and jumps off the page. And quite frankly, when I read it, it slapped me around the face a little bit of, okay, this is how much my work as a teacher, as an educator, as a trainer, as somebody who works with clients all over the world and trains people in this stuff, this is how much I'm still missing. So in an Accenture survey, 79% of people, basically the flip side of the 21% that they actually found, only 21% of people felt that they were comfortable with their abilities to work with data. So 79% of people, 4 in 5, did not feel comfortable with using data. So that's just surveying general people in an organization across the board, across the grades. 4 in 5 people didn't feel comfortable with using data. That scares me. That genuinely, absolutely scares me. I don't know how many of you are trainers or have had that experience of standing in front of a room and you kind of do your introduction as to what your background is, and people think maybe you're a little bit special. You've maybe done computer science or data science courses or whatever else that may be. And you go around the room and say, what's your experience with data? And lots of people are like, oh, I'm not a data person. I'm not a data person. And that moment just makes me really sad, because I just kind of think about, we're all swimming in data. If you're using Tableau, if you're here on this call, You are probably battling within your organization to keep your head above that data water, that there is just so much around you. How do you go and harness it? Yet so many people are kind of pushing that away. They're saying, 4 out of 5 people, I don't know how to deal with it, or I just don't have the comprehension of doing it. I'm not a data person. And I always kind of took that as a real challenge. But it's not just about the data side of it, because just because you can use data doesn't actually cover this off. I'm sure you've worked with lots of people in your organizations across your careers who can use data, but there's something missing. Why can't they engage and utilize what they're finding within that data as well as they can? And that's where this number, 84%, again, jumped off the page when I was reading through a data literacy report by Tableau. They released it actually I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago now. Really well put together piece that detailed out just some of the challenges lots of people were having. And this 84% came from the fact that people know communication is really important. Collaboration and working together is actually how pretty much all organizations work. So that's a really important skill we've got to teach. I'm actually more worried about the 16% who didn't think communication and collaboration is important. Maybe that's our true archetypal data geek sitting in the corner, not actually working with anybody. I'm sure that's not you if you're choosing to come to a user group, but I'm sure you know of those folks. When I first started working in data, that was the data team. They literally sat in the corner of the head office. They didn't speak to anybody. They were of a slightly older age group. They'd actually worked at the company longer than I'd have been alive, most of them within that team. They didn't really work with the rest of the business. They produced the numbers, they produced the charts, and they pushed it out there. So the fact that we recognize, or pretty much most people around the table recognize, we still need to communicate and collaborate, and we need to work with data because that's an amazing asset that we have, but lots of people don't feel comfortable doing so, really made me worried. And actually that's pretty much one of the reasons why I wrote the book. So let me just talk about me quickly. This is the time I can do this slide. Normally I have a much bigger presentation about this. I am a massive San Antonio Spurs fan. So when the chance came up to speak to you all, yes, it's why I'm wearing the Spurs top. I've got Aaron Baines' vest from his Christmas Day game in 2016 when he was playing with the Spurs just beside me. But here's me at the Olympics in London, where donning the Spurs vest. That's actually just a few of the San Antonio Spurs vests I actually have. But most of my early work in Tableau, when I really fell in love with the tool, wasn't using it in a business context. It was taking data from the NBA API and other stats and actually just going and visualizing it. So this is actually a moving scatter plot. It's not that complicated, using the pager shelf to actually go and watch the players move around the court. So when you're actually trying to pick apart plays and why it was happening, that's what I was doing for fun in Tableau. It actually taught me loads of the techniques that I still teach today. I just don't get to teach them specifically about basketball, because in the UK, normally I just get asked about who does Michael Jordan play for these days, rather than anything else if I start talking about basketball. So we move swiftly on. Maybe Space Jam 2 solves that, but with how bad I hear it is, maybe it doesn't. So really who I am and what I am is, I am now a consultant. Feel free to boo whenever you want to. But I've worked at the Information Lab for 7 years. Originally, I was a customer of the Information Lab when I was at Barclays, kind of finishing my stint of nearly 7-8 years in financial services. But throughout that time, I've just seen how powerful data was. And actually, when I was running teams, I tried to get Tableau in and really struggled with that at a previous insurer, because I struggled to articulate how important it was to communicate with data and how much better something could be if it was interactive, rather than the static reporting that we're doing currently, if it would refresh more easily and we could actually pipe data much more cleanly. But I didn't have to have that fight at Barclays. There were a couple of people already doing that work, and that made my life so much easier. But the team that I had alongside me to go and support us and really push us on was the Information Lab. So when I decided to kind of go both feet and dive in with both, that they were the company that I decided to go and work with. 4 years of consulting was great fun. My last 3 years, as Chris mentioned, is actually as the trainer alongside Andy Kriebel. So yeah, we're both head coaches to go and train the great folks that we put through. Hopefully you've seen our blogs. We love sharing knowledge. We love teaching. We love helping people get excited about this subject as much as we are, but not just excited about the subject, but actually just go and learn and develop and feel that skills building through. Tableau is a great tool to do that. but there's a lot more general skills that we're always trying to get across. Some of those skills that I tried to get across kind of culminated, and I don't know which one to mention first. Either the Zen Master piece where, yep, I've been a Zen for the last 2 years. That was mostly focused around Tableau prep. That all came from me seeing Tableau prep and realizing that just in the same way that Tableau desktop had changed and empowered people to go and build their own reporting, build their own analysis, use their own contextual knowledge and specialisms, but just have data that they could actually go and add that to, that was really powerful. But we all know that it takes so much hard work to go and grab the data sets that you want, especially when we go and find new data sets, to go and add that additional knowledge, share, find new things within that data source. It takes so long to go and prep that. So when Tableau prep came along and really, for me, lowered that barrier to entry, lowered the challenges that people would have to go and actually start doing that for themselves, that's when I got really excited. That's when we founded Prep and Data as this weekly exercise that every Wednesday we'll share a prep challenge to help people go and test those skills. Because let's face it, in the workplace, if you go and teach or talk to your data governance teams, they're probably not going to be too happy if it's like, hey, can I just have that data set? Because I just want to learn how to manipulate it and change it and filter some stuff out. They're not going to be good fans of that. So we wanted to give some fun data sets where people could get stuck in and work with that and learn those skills to then go and apply to their work. So hopefully they feel more comfortable preparing their own data, just in the same way that Tableau Public did back in the day, to allow people to go and start learning the skills as I was hacking around MBA data in it, share it on Tableau Public and actually develop my skills that way. One day, the Tableau team will give us Prep Public when we can actually then go and do the same with Tableau Prep. But until then, I'll keep Prep and Data going with those challenges to let people go and develop those skills. The prep and skills came in and I realized how far we had to go to actually help people really get to grips with these skills, and that it really was a different skill set from what people were doing within Tableau Desktop. For those of you who've used Tableau for 4 or 5 years, you'll have had that experience where prep didn't exist and you had to go and push so much hard work into the data connection window when you first load a data set. We were trying to squeeze so much into that one space that was really complex to use, hence why it's great that prep was broken out as a separate tool. But it was a different skill set, and it was a very new skill set to a lot of people. So I found that I was actually just writing a whole load of blog posts. I ended up with about 30 before I sent the book idea to O'Reilly, and they thankfully said yes. That led to Tableau Prep up and running. So from beginner to intermediate levels, and actually just a good introduction to how to prepare data. And I finished that book, again, during another UK lockdown. We've had quite a few. We haven't handled the coronavirus perfectly, dare I say, without getting into politics. So at the end of August last year, we published Prep up and running, and I just relaxed. That was it, done. And then I just had a few conversations and just a bit of reflection. When you finish a big project, I'm sure you've all had this, where you kind of have this calm down. And it's like you just give yourself a little bit more time to think, because you're not kind of pressed by deadlines. You're not trying to get so much stuff done. And I started thinking and reflecting on my career, and it generally actually made me quite sad that we hadn't changed enough, that we were still going through so much. And it wasn't just about the data prep side. It was actually just about how we work with data. And I was thinking back to lots of the organizations that I've worked with, and don't get me wrong, I do feel that that improvement's being made with the folks I've been working with, and hopefully in the organizations that I've worked with as well. But it didn't feel enough. And O'Reilly were talking to me about, well, do you fancy writing another book? What would it be about? And that's when I submitted this idea that actually, let's go and look at all of that. I'm going to use my career to date, and I know it's not the longest career in the world by any means, but I'm going to go and look at that career and just kind of assess the situation that we're in, and why are we not in a better place? So why actually is it so hard to communicate with data? Back to the kind of subject of today's talk. And the first bit, obviously, when you talk about communicating with data, is you have to think about communication, and really probably not knowledge for anybody, but four different types of communication. You're probably well aware of these: verbal, so how we speak to each other; non-verbal, body language. Thank God for video calls over COVID period, or if we were just doing this all by voice, that would be a lot harder for everybody. But also written language as well. And in the formal education system, that's where we kind of stop. We don't always think about this fourth factor that is absolutely up there. I actually researched really hard to see, well, could I go and find a list of how we communicate and just find the top three? Because in the education system that I've gone through in the UK, and for most of that I've kind of seen and felt around the world, I just kind of think about the top three. I don't think about this fourth factor of just visual communication. Like, yes, we clearly have art classes, but we don't really think about visualization and what we have to do that. And certainly the use of data within that is just non-existent within schools. We might build the pie chart or line chart, but that's pretty much where we draw the proverbial line, and we don't go any further. That feels like a big gap. And going back to thinking about that 79% of people who don't feel comfortable doing this, is it really a surprise? Well, again, if you've been to a Tableau conference, you will know pre-attentive attributes. So this is the way that we can use our innate abilities as humans just to go and understand complexity really quickly. And there's certain triggers through our vision, so that visual understanding that we understand. Some are stronger than others. Length, width, very strong in terms of how we go and perceive differences. That really helps us. There's other things that don't in quite so strong a way. So motion, grouping, etc. We can pick apart. 2D position is also very strong as well. But lots of these different factors are, for me, were completely alien, as this is the way that we can actually visually communicate with others, until I actually found that Tableau, this is what it was doing. Desktop guides us on how to do this in a really effective way. But that feels like a big miss, that if this is such a powerful way to communicate with each other in a world where our attention is just being grabbed by every single thing around us, and that's not just probably Twitter, the world is competing for people's attention and trying to get that focus, we have to be able to communicate more effectively than we do to go and share the important things that we're actually finding. So why aren't we taught that fourth technique? Actually, I've found we're only really taught that fourth technique in our organizations as we actually start to learn these skills. Otherwise, I haven't really come across them. And I'd love to see in the chat, if you do come across them elsewhere, I'd really love to understand that a little bit more. But we certainly don't think about that visual communication outside or inclusive of data. It feels like a weird jump from going from this visual part to data, unless you're inside a Tableau user group, which is why I feel comfortable going between these two subjects in front of you all. Because data for me breaks down to two factors. It's not just our own data skills, like our own data skills are part of it. It's also about the person that you're talking to and their data skills. So as I was writing the book, what I found myself doing was not writing and covering the content that I cover at the data school. With the data school, we get people to reply using Tableau to show their skills, both in terms of design, because that's pretty hard to teach. There are factors that we do teach within that, but actually just to see how they certainly pick up the tool in the first place. So it requires some data knowledge. So what I found when I was writing the book was actually I started thinking about the people that I've come across in my working life where they weren't in that position to begin with. And I go all the way back to where I actually went in the prep book, first of all, which is, let's go and talk about the different data types. And I started searching through all of the other data visualization books I have, and there's a lot just on the shelf just to the side of me here. And no data visualization book that I found really went into what data is. And I think it's virtually impossible to go and get somebody to be strong at a subject to understand why we need to go and visualize in the way that we do when we actually don't understand those constituent parts. And I think that's one of my first requests to you all is when we go and start sharing what we do within Tableau and the amazing visualizations and the analysis we do, are we really helping our stakeholders and our users and our viewers really understand what those constituent parts are within that? Are we giving them the fundamental education to basically allow them to go and assess this stuff and think about it critically? Because that's super important. And I'd still find people are completely alien to this idea of string data versus integers versus Boolean, etc. And it still has the best dad joke, which now I'm a dad, I can use, that what is Boolean data? And normally a little hand goes up, true and false. And I'm like, true. and then nobody laughs, but at which point I can shrug that off. It's fine, we can move on. At least I can do that dad joke now, we're all good. But it's those fundamental building blocks that I feel like that's fundamentally missing. We need to go and fill some of those gaps, not necessarily to everybody, but to help people go and use this if we really believe that we can help people in a self-service world. But very quickly, where we get to is a lot more complexity. Thinking about where we go and source that data from, clearly Tableau Prep falls into that in my head. It doesn't have to, it can be lots of other tools as well. But thinking about how we go and join these different data sets together, because we are all swimming in data. I truly believe that. So joins, unions, how we work with databases and the traditional storage of data, the less traditional, but becoming very, very common, the use of APIs to go and get hold of that data, then thinking about those data functions or those data types, we've got to think about the different calculation functions that we then use with that. Very quickly, without having much of a data education, no wonder why people don't feel that they've got this ability to kind of understand what data is, what they can use it for, how to read it, how to interpret it, when actually the fundamental skills that I probably assume most of the people on this call take for granted or recognize that, you know, we are lucky that we do understand them. It must be really tough for those who don't. We've got a big gap that we actually need to go and fill. So we've got this kind of gap in communication because we don't really think about visual communication. And then we've got this gap in data that most people don't really feel comfortable using it. That is possibly where I started to feel that we were maybe going wrong when trying to communicate with data. Because we then get to the space where once we can do that, we can start to think about how do we actually analyze? You know, how do we then go and update the analysis that I built? Does it make sense to update? How does that work? How do I go and tell people about the stuff that I find? How can I communicate that effectively? And that's where, still within my book, yes, I clearly talk about chart types and how to effectively do that, but the other things that go around charts, like annotations, text, spacing, all of those kind of things. But ultimately, where I kind of bubbled down to and boiled down to on these thoughts was this last line. What happens when the data disagrees with what I think? Do we spend time and do we have the critical skills to really go and pick that apart and challenge ourselves to say, is the thing that I found that disagrees with me really there? Or have I actually done something wrong? And I feel that's where people get really uncomfortable with data very quickly. So even if those skills exist, that can be quite tough. And that's where we get to other people's knowledge, not just our own. You know, I'm sure you have all tried to capture project requirements before. It is not the easiest thing to do. And it's certainly not easy to do when people aren't comfortable with actually understanding what is possible with data. The more examples that we see and we share, and the more I see within the media, in terms of charts within newspapers and online media outlets, it makes me happy, unless it's some terrible representations, and we've all seen those examples get shared. We see more examples, and that actually makes us clearer because people will talk about data more and what the art of the possible is, which is nice, it helps. But there's this wider piece where actually the environment needs to be quite good to go and get a really good, effective project spun up around data, really land and deliver analysis that's impactful, that even if it disagrees with what's commonly known, that it can actually go and really resonate and actually make the change that it deserves with what you've actually found within that. Your stakeholders' knowledge of a subject is really important. But if they don't really know what data is available to go and support that, that can be really tough and actually very time consuming to go and build that. Even if you have those two factors and you don't have software that supports that, that can also be really tough. And when I built out this Venn diagram, and no, it's not proportionally sized, and yes, that makes me feel bad as somebody who represents data, I found this little sweet spot, and I was thinking back on the projects I've gone over, and it's really tough to actually go and find the projects that really hit home. And when they did, it was because I had a stakeholder who actually understood what data was available, but also what the software could do, and therefore how it affected their questions. And that sweet spot is really tough to find. Doesn't mean that we should give up if it's not there. We should just go and consciously try and fill those gaps, because that will actually help us quite a lot. So what I kind of boiled that down to as I was writing was that actually the requirements gathering process is really important. And I'm in the process of reading Steve Vexler's book, the bigger picture, the big picture, that came out recently as well. And he has a lot about requirement gathering as well, and how we don't do that very well. We're still trying to do things in a very formal manner when actually those requirements need to be conversational. With Tableau, hopefully you know and feel comfortable that they need to be very iterative as well. When I talk to other people who use other tools, I really play up the iterative piece. I don't need to do that for this audience. So if we have a conversation about those requirements, I honestly believe most humans are intelligent. And if you go and show them something, they'll ask another question, another question, another question. So you've got to have a conversation with that data, and that's quite tough to do if we're missing some of these gaps in terms of how to communicate clearly, but also how to use data effectively. In the situations where that happens really well, the final part today, organizational challenges. This is another place where when I looked back on what had worked well and what hadn't worked well in the clients that I worked with, the projects that I'd seen, I came across a number of organizational challenges. And I think a few of these will feel familiar to you. And I won't go through them all, but I'll pick a few out. So tables versus pretty pictures. I'm not sure, I've seen a few nods on the screens there. Oh, the pretty picture one gets me every time. If you ever want to make me angry, that is just like a red hot poker into my side of just calling my work a pretty picture. It's like, thank you very much. That's a lovely compliment. Now, do you want to see why this is actually telling you that you've got some terrible performance in your business that you actually need to change? I came from a financial services background. So clearly I have to battle that table versus pretty picture piece, and we'll dive into that a bit more in a second. But all of these conflicting elements is actually what's faced by anybody who works with data in any organization. Do we go and work with extracted data that's easier, that's more stable versus live data sets that are just sometimes jumping around all over the place? Do we allow for standardization of our templates? So do we create templates that we go and build everything against so everybody knows where those filters are and everything else? Well, hang on, if I'm trying to communicate and make something memorable, that's very difficult to do if you're forcing me to template everything. When do you let me be innovative and creative to create a unique message and something that resonates with people and sticks with people? All of these different factors were competing. So if you want to see my discussion and my arguments between myself on all of these factors, feel free to grab the book. But really the one that I wanted to focus on today was tables versus pretty pictures, because this for me is just that fundamental piece about communication. Because we know that tables are accurate, they're familiar for people, they're easy to read, they provide clarity when we give them, but they completely miss the other side of this visual communication that we're trying to do, creating this beautiful overview, creating something that's memorable, that captures, oh, I remember you did a chart that looked, oh yeah, no, that's the one. It's a very different conversation when you build these visualizations versus just the tables, but we can't ignore what tables actually offer us. Because tables have been around forever. Let's face it, that's not going to change. They're not going to go away anytime soon, even though we'll clash with them. We can make them more attractive, like the piece at the bottom. Is it clear as the information? I'll come back to why it might be a little bit more effective rather than just what we have at the top. But the pretty pictures can go too far as well. And without me having another 2 hours to rant about Sankey charts, which I won't do today, I'll save that for another time. Sankey charts and curvy charts will grab attention. I'm not saying there's not a place for them. Grabbing that attention and grabbing a stakeholder's awareness, or certainly used in the media, is absolutely key in getting your message across. If you don't get your message across, and if you don't grab that attention in the first place, there's kind of no point in coming up with a message sometimes. But I think we've got to be careful with this kind of idea of pretty pictures has to be that attention grabbing and doesn't have the substance behind it. What I found is you can make beautiful things that have substance. And for me, clearly presented information that actually covers quite a large range of subjects, like the dashboard on the right, which is inspired by one of my colleagues, Ellen Blackburn, who makes beautiful Tableau presentations and visualizations and dashboards. And if you ever want to get inspiration, go and check out her Tableau public profile. That you can actually go and piece together some really complex imagery, really complex data sets, and actually simplify it really nicely. either through the use of contextual numbers, so it's what some people call big ass numbers, or even just basic charts. You can actually tie this stuff together really well. And actually, you should use both, is where I boil down to in the book, that you can't just say we're one side or the other. I've worked with clients that are just table people. I've worked with clients that are just visualization people and want a table because we know that's not the best way. But let's face it, if you can use visualizations that guide people to the right part within a table to really go and summarize that information, take them down to go and highlight what those key issues are, that's where we're going to win. It's about compromise. And if we think back to all of those different challenges that I've listed above, lots of that is about compromise. And that's how we're actually going to really go and effectively communicate with data. And I think that's where we kind of keep hitting these blockages, that we all think about best practice, whether that's best practice in how we prepare data sets. I've never found one single solution for that, or how we're communicating with data, which also we don't have a single solution for. I think we need to compromise and meet in the middle a little bit more with our stakeholders, but also recognize that lots of them won't be really comfortable with what we do, even though we're all quite good at what we do. And we're, you know, some of us are very good at what we do. And I don't class myself amongst that. I still feel like I'm developing new skills and new styles continually. But I think by thinking about this communication process, by trying to help people understand more about the data itself, we can meet in the middle and communicate more effectively, which ultimately means we can do more with what we do and express ourselves further and communicate in a more memorable way and bring more people in. We're all at different points within that journey in our own skill sets, but so is our audience. So next time you pull together a piece of work and you're kind of about to go and ship that product, do think about that 79%. And how could you actually go and help them feel more comfortable with what we're doing? Because if we do that, then I truly believe we make this field really changeable to what it should be and actually really change the organizations we work in. So at that point, I'll stop. I'll say thank you for listening and take any questions that you have.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you, Carl. That was a great presentation, and can't wait to see the book. I'm definitely going to, I got to know all the other parts to it. I guess Homer, I'll turn it over to you. You want to field any questions? I've got a couple of my own too.
Well, so far, I have not seen any questions come to me directly, so we can also open the floor. People can also come off of mute if they want to ask a question.
Okay.
You want to get things started for us, Chris?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So, you know, I like and I sort of saw a comment there in the chat as well, someone talking about leaders, communicating with your leaders, understanding sort of, I mean, obviously they're smart, or you would hope so. That's how they got to be our leaders. But how do you help your leaders understand data or understand the reason you might recommend one of your approaches versus maybe the way they want to go?
Yeah, I still think it's one of the hardest things. And it's amazing the difference to have a leader in the organization or the leader that you're working for within that organization understand data and get it. Because I talk about it in the book, actually, the trickle down that you have when you get a new leader in the organization and they are more of a data-driven person who was there before, and then you see the management levels underneath change, and then therefore the people underneath that have to respond and kind of step up as well. And that's where I often see the biggest growth within organizations. But what if that leader isn't data-driven? I've certainly worked for some. I won't do names as this is actually recorded. But it is, I think personally, it is the toughest challenge, because they've got to the position they've got to without having the skill, without actually potentially seeing the need for it. They often don't see the work, I also believe, that happens behind the scenes to make this actually possible. The biggest change I think you can make is find those compromises. They're going to sit on one side of those two in terms of those battles around what their preference is, that they will request live information. They won't ever work with anything that's older. They want everything to be standardized, and you've got creativity that you desperately want to get out there. I think you have to meet them in the middle more and more and actually kind of start over their side of the fence. And what I've found is if you slowly build in the elements that you want to, and that a little bit more creativity, building elements, the visual elements into tables, I found is a great way to start luring people towards more visual formats. or showing the benefits of working with extracts in terms of performance, or maybe those kind of things on a more practical level. And slowly over time, after what I did within financial services, and this is kind of giving the game away a little bit to any of my former stakeholders, I'm sorry I lied to you a little bit, that I would build your table. And I'd build a little chart element down at the bottom or at the top just to set some context. And pretty much month by month, I would drop about 5 pixels off that table, and I would shrink it down and make the visual elements bigger and bigger and bigger. And actually with most of the stakeholders I worked with, they never noticed, and they started asking for more charting elements over time. It's a trust thing. It's a trust thing between you and them. And that can be hard with people who are pretty time poor to go and grab that time and attention. But if you can go over to their side of the fence a little bit and then slowly bring them back to yours by building that trust, by showing that capability and showing the ability to do the stuff, I found that actually most people are willing to go and kind of take that jump and go with you to get there. So a lot of patience, a lot of tolerance, which I'm not great at, but just trying to find those compromises where you can go, okay, this isn't best practice, but actually I can get you back here over the next month or next set of few months by slowly kind of changing this back to what I want, and actually just really see if you notice and see if that actually creates any issues, or does it create new questions and you found new things.
Yeah. I did have a question. I guess, you talk about data literacy and people are at varying levels. We have some folks maybe even on this call that, their organization is just starting down the path of analytics, right? Do you have maybe two or three tips, you could share with, how they should get started and maybe even highlight, these are some of the pitfalls you want to avoid?
Yeah, number one, never use the term data literacy.
There we go. All right.
Which sounds fun.
Guilty.
Whenever I've used the term data literacy and in front of a room full of managers or executives, they've gone, of course our people are data literate. We use data all the time. And then you go and look at some of the reports that are used in the organization or the requirements that are given to go and say, hey, this is how we want to see our data. I like to think of data as a communication tool. Clearly, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. So just in the same way that we use words, whether spoken or written, I often think about fluency instead. So I try to use the term data fluency instead of data literacy, because I think it creates a different conversation, because fluency clearly feels almost like the different grades that you have within school. And you don't expect everybody to be instantly that senior you're with in high school, rolling out the door, going off to college. But actually people see that as a progression, and people can be at different levels of that progression as they go through. So when I talk to people about fluency, I'll often get a more genuine reaction around, oh yeah, actually not everybody feels comfortable with this, or there's certain grades or job roles where we just don't use data, or they don't feel comfortable using data. I'm still surprised that number that Accenture found was 79%, but you get that a little bit more. How you change that is really unique, I think, to every organization. Lots of it's about the history, what's been tried before. Certainly spending a little bit of time digging into that and why aren't they more data literate is quite interesting. I've worked with some big manufacturers, and you kind of think about modern processing, that of course they would analyze everything to the sun, and they don't, because actually their team just haven't ever had that method. They've sold a product that's always been so effective, they can produce it pretty easily, they've not had those challenges, it hasn't had to be optimized, they've never used data. That was a really interesting client, because it completely changed my assumption about who would be there. At the same time, within financial services, again, you think there would be data everywhere. Finance, there's numbers, right? No, not at all. I often found with lots of the folks that I worked with in various different banks, they actually struggled with percentages, even basic things like fractions or percentages they struggled with. And I think, again, we're really familiar with this. It's really easy for us to think that the people that we're trying to help run the table think and know the same stuff that we do. So really taking a step back and actually assessing what people do get and what they don't get is actually the biggest thing. Just watching how they work and how they try to work with data and where it is involved. If it isn't there at all, you've got to really go back to, hey, let's talk about the different data types. Let's talk about where data is actually created. I actually did that session at the data school earlier today, and the team, even though they're using data, really struggle with that. to think about where data actually comes from. Because then when we think about where it comes from, we can work out what we might actually want to use from it. And then we can make it really relevant to people. And that's that final thing I would say. Data literacy is a weird term for most people to come across, as is data fluency. But if you can make it real to show how it could add benefit, how it could help people understand what they're doing, to go along with their expertise, that's really powerful, combining those two factors. And that's ultimately where I'm trying to get people to. But the exact methods of how to get there, I have not mastered that. I'm not even close. I think you could become quite wealthy if anybody does master that. Please let me know.
Right.
But there's certainly there's the chances I take to go and step back, and I've found I'm stepping back further than I ever have done before to really go back to basics.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think we're all still trying to master how to do that. I hope you don't have data fluency trademarked. I definitely want to start using that in my conversation. I like that.
Feel free to.
All right.
There's a podcast called Data Literacy by Alan Hillary and Sarah Nell that's just starting up. I think they've got one or a couple of episodes out so far, and I'm actually going to be interviewed by them in a couple of weeks' time. So it's quite fun chatting to them the other day around going on the Data Literacy podcast and saying that no, I want to talk about data fluency. So listen in. I'm intrigued to see where that conversation goes.
Maybe you'll help them change the name of their podcast.
Maybe.
Yeah. So I guess, Homer, we got any other questions out there, or I'll open the floor. I have one more.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. I have one myself if we have time, but
sure.
Let's take a couple from the audience. This one comes from Jared Flores, and he asks, have you encountered people that are adamantly against everything that isn't a table? If they say they thrive with tables and don't want charts, should we keep their attention by just giving them tables, or risk losing it to try to introduce charts even when they say they don't want them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love Jared's thoughts behind that. It's really hard because you could have the best thought in the world, you could write the best book in the world, and I'm not saying I've done that either. If nobody buys it and reads it, it's pointless. If you do a piece of analysis and you find something that is so important, but you can't find a way to influence and communicate it to others, it's a wasted opportunity. So I feel that you do have to do that compromise. You do have to swallow your pride, swallow your knowledge about how effectively this thing could be, and start to show them everything that they need within a table. But I still believe there's lots of great techniques out there by actually Jared and the Flages and lots of other examples within Tableau Public where the visual elements that you can put within a table, even, and I've seen this technique used multiple times now, a red dot next to the number that you actually want somebody to pay attention to grabs their attention, and you're using a visual element to go and help influence and guide the conversation, even though they are getting a table. Maybe they go completely against color and print it in black and white, have that dot in black, it's fine. That dot will grab their attention. It will look differently in a column of numbers. Those little elements are those kind of building blocks that I talk about, that go and start doing those things and slowly increase them. And I've worked with some pretty hard-headed people in my time. I'm sure other people say that about me as well. But in terms of their thoughts to how they want it for a reason. It's often that familiarity. It's often that piece that they feel comfortable with. You've got to find not how far you can push them and how quickly, but you've slowly got to build that trust in it. And I think just slowly introducing those elements can really change and make a huge amount of progress for people.
Okay, the next question comes from Tracy DeGolier, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because it's near and dear to my heart myself, so I'm going to add a little context. But we've all seen gridlock in organizations who can't make decisions because they're in a state of paralysis by analysis. We find ourselves swimming in data, charts, information, can't make a decision, so what do? We ask for more. And then we just get more confused, and it has this negative impact on not only the time that it makes the decisions, but if we're able to make decisions at all. What advice do you have about this condition that's epidemic in modern business
Give up and
environments.
go home. We're done. The world is screwed. Oh no, we actually want something useful. It's frustrating, and it's happening more. I think there's hope though, and the hope actually comes from people becoming better at communicating with data. That there are conflicting opinions, as there are about anything in life, and this is where I feel, me as a history student, whenever you learn a subject, you learn the traditional view of something, the revisionist, and then the neo-revisionist, which counters both of those. And every single thing in history, every event in history has those three views about it. So I kind of grew up, and as I was educated, I learned there was always the multiple views around something. And I think it's having comfort in that complexity is key. So to Tracy's question, where do you go and find that clarity? And I think the answer is there's never an absolute. I think making people feel comfortable, there's never an absolute. But actually, if we just aim to make better decisions rather than absolutely always having to find the right decision, we actually can get past that paralysis or analysis paralysis, or whichever way you want to take it, being blocked by just too much information. We need to learn how to handle that information. We need to go and communicate that really clearly. But actually that comes down to quite a lot of the own person's individual skills, that I think when we feel more comfortable with actually reading charts, but actually taking more of the raw data underneath it and actually working it with ourselves, we can go and find the answers to that. I was reminded actually when I was teaching today, I mentioned Christian Chabot. So if people don't know, he was the original CEO of Tableau. And there was one of his conference talks, and I wish I remember which one it was as a keynote, where he said the future business leaders would be data analysts, not accountants. Now, clearly at a Tableau conference, that's going to get a lot of applause and cheers, which it did. But I'm trying to remember, I think it was about 2014 he said this, and it still sticks with me today, not because I'm a data analyst, I've got leadership intentions, that's not what's going through my brain, but it's that ability that traditionally leaders in organizations who are making those decisions, who are pulling those thoughts together, are the ones that can handle financial data. They can handle that complexity, and no financial number is perfect. Otherwise, we'd all be better at investing on the stock market, right? So actually, there's the complexity and the challenge within the numbers of what are you reading from that situation? What are you reading from the data points you're getting? Well, we all know organizations are not just based on financial numbers. We know employee health, mental health, everything that's gone on and been highlighted over the last few years is absolutely key within organizations being successful as well. If you just were consumed by all of those data points and you didn't have good skills at refining and finding the key messages within that data, no wonder why we struggle with that. So I'm never going to say it's easy even when you do have those skills. But I think getting more people to be comfortable analyzing data and analyzing it for themselves rather than just what's presented to them, I think that's the way that we start to get past that. But yeah, again, not an easy one, but thankfully we've got Tableau, and that makes our lives at least easier to do some of that self-service for us and to go and quiz and check and validate what we're being told as to whether that's the way that we see the world as well.
Okay, yeah, we got a couple more minutes, Homer.
Yeah, I will throw one out there. So we've been focusing here on data communication, like actually being able to convey information from person A to person B using data in different forms. But you could communicate very effectively and never deliver a message. You can communicate and never have any value to the message because it's not actionable. Maybe I think it's probably a topic for another meeting, but I want to get your thoughts about not just the literacy, but the relevancy, how do you make data with gravitas, where it really has an impact?
Lovely question. Lovely question. Yeah, that feels like a PhD thesis, doesn't it? To try and answer that one. It takes skill, it takes experience, and it takes a lot of learning. I really even though communicating data visually is a very powerful thing, we all know that it takes quite a lot of effort to refine that message and to really deliver it well. We still deliver that in many different ways, whether that's sending an image in an email, whether that's pushing something on Tableau Public and sending a tweet out about it, or whether it's standing in front of a room presenting your latest piece of work and trying to grab someone's attention and hold it and get across the point that you really want to get across. It is really difficult. It is absolutely challenging to do it. But I think the way that we communicate and really drive that change is that people around the table have the appreciation and the ability to understand what we're trying to present to them. So it stops being about, why did you choose that chart? Or that chart looks pretty. And it becomes, when I look at a chart, I see the glaring outlier. We all spot it straight away. We talk about the outlier. And that's where something does become more actionable. It's where something has more gravitas, because we're all spotting the most important messages from it, or somebody finds a message that nobody else has within that, and maybe the data wasn't communicating quite the right way in the first place. And I'll give one example of this that I see consistently used everywhere. I see line charts or bar and bar charts where we look at this year versus last year. And everybody still that I see uses this year versus last year. And I have some examples in what I just showed you in the dashboard that I just shared. And what we're trying to ask the user to do is actually spot the variance. Why don't we just show the variance as a simple bar chart showing whether something's increased or decreased? And I've had that conversation 4 times in the last 3 days with different people about different projects in different ways. And each time it's actually involved a stakeholder who the charts had to be explained to them quite a lot, not because they're stupid, not because they don't use data that much, but because the analyst is trying to build so much into what they're trying to show. They haven't taken that step back and gone, what is the one thing that I want somebody to understand here? And I've just gone, it's the variance. That's what you're trying to show, isn't it? And they're like, yeah, let's just visualize the variance. Thankfully, we have Vision tooltips, so we can then go and show the absolute numbers behind it and show those line charts anyway. But I think sometimes it's about not just even how sophisticated and a beautiful way to present information. It's what really is that question that we're trying to answer and step back. Because if you really simplify that question, if you really get to the root of that, and that's why I think it's conversational to actually get there. I'm not thinking I'm that intelligent that I always get it right. I think if you have that conversation, you have the chance to do that. You can find that powerful answer, and that powerful answer actually has the gravitas. It's not about me sharing the message. It's about people aren't being able to understand that message and me sharing it in a really simple, effective way. That's what actually has gravitas. It's why I have 2 very big numbers at the start of this presentation. It's not about me presenting it. It's just about the actual power of those 2 simple percentages. It's that simple message actually can actually hold a lot of sway and have quite a lot of gravitas. Also helps if you make them size 140 font, but there we go.
Right. Wow, yeah, totally agree. And sort of as a follow-up to that, it really hit home when you showed that Sankey diagram, because I think we've all been there. We all try to impress, when I have a cool dashboard. Last question, what are like the top 3 vises you're like overused, too much hype, stop using them, or use them sparingly?
I'm channeling Andy Cockbrief, who is Tableau's evangelist, often hosts ScienViz here. It depends. I generally don't think there is one thing that's overused or whatever else. I prefer to flip the question the other way. And I see this asked a lot. And if you ever want to stump somebody as a data professional to really see what their thoughts are, ask them if they could only use 3 charts ever again to communicate all the messages they need to, what would they use? And that's really hard to answer. If you want my answer, first of all, scatterplot. Scatterplots, no matter how complex the message, a scatterplot simplifies it quite a lot. You will see quite a few pages of scatterplots in my book for exactly that reason. We have to use a bar chart because we're data visualizers, and every data viz book tells us that we absolutely have to. But then controversially, I don't go for a line chart or something like that. I actually think a heat map. I think a heat map or a highlight table, depending on which way you want to cut it, actually tells us so much about a subject and can cut quite complex subjects and show us trends in a really interesting way that we don't get from other charts. So they would be my 3. So rather than say, hey, don't ever draw another coxcomb chart or avoid the Sankeys or the radial bar charts, No, I think they have their place. They grab attention, and I think that's really important to get your message across. Of you've got to shout pretty loud in this world sometimes to be heard, especially if you don't have much of a platform to stand on. Lots of people find really important messages every day. I'd love to hear those more clearly. So it's a case of how can we communicate that a little bit more clearly, and for me, those three do the job. So Chris, I'm going to throw this back to you.
Yeah.
What are your three charts? If you could only have three charts for the rest of your life, three chart types, what would they be? What would you use?
I'm sort of in the same camp. I'm more of the I'll go with a bar chart, and then I would say I tend to favor lines a lot. I don't know why. I like to see trends, and then I do like tables. But to your point, like almost like a heat map of sorts, like that. That's what I'll do.
Nice, good.
Yeah.
I really want people to drop their three into the chat now. I feel like we could almost create a data
let's do that.
set
Let's take a little survey. Let's take a little survey. What do you guys find? I know we're up here on time, Carl. This has been a fascinating discussion. I can't wait to see the book. I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to meet with us. We all look forward to it. Everybody, give a virtual round of applause, to Carl, and check out his new book, Communicating with Data, coming out October 21st. So, good luck, Carl. Thank you very much.
Cool, and thank you very much for having me, everybody. And hopefully I get to come and meet you all in person and enjoy Rudy's barbecue, which is one of my favorite spots, and get to go and see some more Spurs games, which before the pandemic, after the Tableau conference, that was almost my thing. I'd go to San Antonio and watch some Spurs games, but not this year. Hey.
Definitely. Thanks, Carl.
Cool, thank you.
All right, guys. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about our next sort of event. We're going to do the breakout room sessions. So again, for those of you that are new to this, we have two breakout rooms today. One is Ask Anyone Anything, which Homer is going to be emceeing or hosting, and then Strategy and Adoption, which I will try to do if Zoom will let me join the room. If not, Kobe will help. But yeah, feel free to join one of these rooms. We'll gather for the next 20 minutes or so, and then we will not congregate back here. You can go ahead and just exit out. So I'll go and open up the rooms right now, and feel free to pick a room.